Hi, everybody. Welcome to the middle grade 2023 debut panel. Maybe the first, definitely the last of 2023. So, welcome to everyone watching. I'm really happy that I'm going to be able to chat with these really fun middle grade stories, which I kind of just read back to back, and it was like the single greatest like 2 weeks of my last couple months. I am Lily. I'm the moderator and I'm the face, I guess, behind Utopia State of Mind on the internet, I suppose. And I'm going to have the authors introduce themselves. We will try to have space at the end for questions. So if you have any, please put them in the chat and I will remember hopefully to go back and monitor them as well. So first we're going to start off with Ben, and then we're going to hear about everyone's books.
I'm hitting my microphone is who I am. I'm Ben Crane, he, him. I am the writer of Cosmic Cadets Contact. This is book one of a graphic novel series that my partner and I created. It's a science fiction middle grade adventure story.
Pick up my book like Ben did. Hi, I'm Elisa Stone Leahy, she, her, and I am the author of Tethered to Other Stars. It's a middle grade contemporary fiction book that has to do with immigration and finding your voice and standing up for what is right. And the second book comes out next year, and there should be an announcement coming up in the next few months about that.
Okay, so I'm Geeta Raleigh, and I'm the author of The Destiny of Minu Moonshine, which is a middle grade fantasy adventure. And it's about Minu and her quest to save the Queendom of Moonlally, which is a kind of alternative historical version of India.
And I'm Laura Parnham. My book is Peril at Price Manor. It's a sort of spooky middle grade, but it's kind of more funny than scary. It's about a girl who loves horror movies and wants to be a horror movie actress. She goes through an adventure where she has to basically learn to be the heroine instead of the victim or the damsel in distress in her own life story.
So the first thing I want to ask is basically about our topic, or like our topic for today's panel, which is middle grade books. And I want to know from all of you, what brought you to the middle grade genre or the age group, and what do you think is so special about middle grade readers or like the middle grade age group? Ben, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. So middle grade is not my only genre, but I really, really enjoy writing for middle grade. I feel like we're in the middle of a middle grade all ages renaissance right now. It got started maybe 15 years ago or so, but there's just a lot of respect being paid to middle grade readers, which was not there certainly when I was growing up. I feel like all the things I read that were aimed at me when I was 12 were just fart jokes, basically, and didn't really have a lot to them and a lot to say. But middle grade readers are just as complex emotionally as anyone else. And stories are how we find our place in the world. And I write middle grade stories because they're the stories I wish I'd been able to read when I was 12 and they didn't exist. And hopefully now they do. So
Great answer. I love that. Yeah, middle grade, and maybe I have found that often people don't understand what we mean by middle grade. So maybe I'll give a quick little definition too, which someone might disagree with my definition, but essentially it's often thought of as the books that kids in middle school will read, but really it starts in about fourth grade. And I'd say fourth through eighth grade is probably a middle grade range. It's what's tricky about kids at that age is they're all over the place. I mean, you've got kids in 4th grade who might be ready to read something like Tethered to Other Stars, which is really upper middle grade, and you might have kids in 8th grade who want the fart jokes. So it's it's a huge range, but that's part of why it's so fun. You can explore in so many ways, and middle grade really is this stage where kids are moving out of this place where they have often, a lot of times, the kids in the books, but also the kids reading the books, are very rooted in a safe home place, and they are looking out at the world. Not obviously not everyone, but that's just sort of the general place you come from, this understanding of the world and what it means, and you're looking out towards everything around you, and it's all new and it's an adventure. And middle grade is kind of right at that precipice where you're heading out there on your own, and you're starting to think beyond what you've been told to think your whole life by your parents and teachers. You're starting to explore what you actually believe, and often that might not be the same. So in my book really deals with some of that, those kind of bigger ideas that kids explore at that age. But you're not quite in the YA section, where it often tends to be much more, there's a lot of romance, there's a lot more expectation that there's going to be other representations of violence or other things that are considered more mature. You're not there yet, which means that you can really delve into some of those more profound, more subtle ideas about the world. And I really love that. I love that because adults often already know what they think, and younger kids just aren't quite ready to get there and explore those things. But middle grade is the perfect spot to really have interesting conversations, and setting it in a story is just, that's how we learn. Stories are such a gift. So I love middle grade. I also do write other genres, but middle grade has been my focus for launching this career of an author. So I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, I began writing middle grade because certainly for children's literature in English, it's just such a rich area. All the kind of classic sort of children's literature that we kind of grew up with in the UK, particularly sort of fantasy and magic, falls into that middle grade category. I guess over here it's sometimes just called literature for older children, or books for older children. But I suppose the reason I started writing it particularly is that those were the books that made me fall in love with reading and with literature. And back then, of course, there were no diverse characters in those kinds of books at all, like literally zero. And happily that's begun to change over the last few years. So I think that was my drive for kind of writing for that middle grade audience, because those books I loved. I just wanted to bring them to readers who might then be able to see somebody like themselves as the hero of those genres.
Yeah, I agree with everything that everyone has said. I was drawn to middle grade because I feel like, the readers at this age are just sort of starting to do things without their parents. They might go to a friend's house by themselves. They might be, making their own lunch or things like that they're starting to do these things without their parents. And so a lot of this gives kids a taste of independence. So in middle grade books, you'll see a lot of kids doing things without their parents. And I think one of my favorite parts of middle grade is just trying to figure out how to get rid of the parents. You just want to have them out of the picture as much as possible, because these kids are, having to have agency and have to make choices and to get through difficult situations on their own, which really helps to empower the readers, because they can see themselves in the characters and can, think of themselves as doing things independently as well.
That is the perfect segue to my next question, which is that, I think that some of the reasons why I've experienced myself reading now like a middle grade or renaissance, I guess, or resurgence, at least in my own reading taste, is because of how empowering, I guess, how empowering I feel after reading them. I think that is kind of a trademark as well of a lot of middle grade age groups, and like stories for middle grade readers. So I'd love to know from you all Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I'd love to know from you all if you could talk about what you might want readers to take away from your stories, and then the connection between their age and the abilities for literary empowerment. So, Laura, do you want to just start? Because I feel like what your last sentence was basically leading into this question.
Yeah, so independence is like a big theme in my story. Two of my characters who are twins, they're 12-year-old, they're about to turn 13, but they've lived a very sheltered life. So their father, well, when they were younger, their mother passed away, and they were really young, so they don't remember that. But their father just was so upset by this that he wanted to shelter his kids so much so that nothing terrible would happen to them. But of course, this has bad consequences, because when they're sheltered and they're not able to do things on their own, they don't know how to do things on their own. So, I mean, in my book, it's kind of, they're sheltered to the extreme. They're not allowed to leave their home, but it's a big mansion, and it's got, a household staff, and they do everything for these kids. But the result is that they don't know how to, fix themselves that snack, or even tie their own shoes, because everybody's doing things for them. And so suddenly I put them in this situation where the adults are out of the picture. And not only do they have to like figure out getting food and tying shoes, but they also have this creature on the loose that is potentially dangerous. And I think, what I want to show kids, even though the readers aren't sheltered to this extreme, but what I want to show them is that if these kids in this book can handle this situation, then my readers can handle really difficult situations as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in there because I guess kind of the opposite of what Laura's saying, because I really wanted to believe in Minu, my character's resilience, despite her kind of her young age. And she has this very sad situation where she loses her grandmother, who's her main caregiver. And the thing is that although they live under a very oppressive regime, Minu and her grandmother are kind of dismissed and overlooked because of their kind of poverty and marginalized status. And that gives them this paradoxical kind of empowerment, because the grandmother is a really strong character, and she really pushes Minu towards education and towards studying things like martial arts, which perhaps more wealthy or privileged girls at that time in that world would not study. And I think it's those things that give Minu this kind of belief she has that she can change things. And I think that's the one thing I really wanted young readers to take away. Despite all the odds, despite these odds seeming sometimes insurmountable, that they really can change the world. That's the one thing.
I love that. I'll jump onto that, because that idea of changing the world and making a difference is a part of my book as well. My character Wendy loves astronomy. She's obsessed with the stars, and she thinks about the world from that perspective, the idea of orbits and the way that forces in the universe pull at each other. And that becomes a theme in the book, because she's also dealing with all the different people who are telling her what is right and what to believe and pulling her in different directions. So at the beginning of the book, her parents are from El Salvador and Guatemala, and she was born in the US. And at the beginning of the book, this is 2018, during a very difficult time for the immigrant community in the US. And her family leaves their immigrant community because of immigration raids and moves to a new all-American neighborhood. And that same day, a woman takes sanctuary in the church right across the aisle from them to avoid a deportation notice. And because of this, Wendy has to suddenly think about all of these big things about unjust laws and what that means. And within her own family, there are different opinions, and her parents are telling her one thing. Her dad is saying, we stay out of this. We did things the right way. We just can't get involved. Her brother is very excited about the activist group that's fighting for the woman in sanctuary and getting pulled in that direction. And then at the same time at school, she has kids who are friends and bullies and everything in between, and just trying to find her place So for her, her kind of journey of empowerment really is about figuring out that she can be her own force, and that once she starts making these decisions for herself, she has the power to shift the orbits of everyone around her. And that's that message of empowerment is very much connected to the themes in my book.
So my book is Star Trek for middle schoolers, is the quickest way to pitch what it is. It's about a group of kids who are on a ship that's out exploring the galaxy, going to new planets, meeting new aliens. And so while their parents, who are the command crew, do their adventures, the kids have their own adventures alongside them. And in this first book, the parents make first contact with an alien species that communicates only through empathy. They have no language. Instead, they project their own feelings out, and they feel what the people around them are feeling. But they're these big, scary-looking monsters. So when the adults first meet them, they get scared. And that makes the aliens feel that fear, which then reflects back at the adults, which reflects back at the aliens. And almost immediately, they're in this downward spiral of fear and mistrust. And it falls to the kids, who successfully make friends with an alien child, to then convince these two sides to trust each other, and that they aren't enemies and they don't have to go to war, which is where the adults very quickly find themselves on the brink of outright conflict. And the one thing which we most wanted kids to take away from the book is a model for how empathy can be heroic, and how pausing and considering how your actions look from somebody else's perspective can at times be the bravest and the strongest and most heroic thing that you can possibly do. And that's what, if my readers take one thing away from this, that's what I want them to take.
I think that my character would love your book.
Yeah, it seems very, very connected, like Star Trek for middle grade, and also the stars, obviously, is like a huge, a great connection between them. I want to chat now about some books and some pairings that I found between all of your books, which I had a lot of different pairings, so I had to kind of tone or pare down this list. But the first one, speaking of heroes, I guess the first one that I wanted to talk about, or the first two, were The Destiny of Minnow Moonshine and Peril at Price Manor, because I think that both of your books kind of examine what each of your characters think a hero would look like, a hero would do, a hero would act like. And I would love to know from both of you, what were your first images of your main characters, and how did you explore their own heroism and bravery? So, Gita, do you want to start?
Sure. Yes. So I guess Minu's physical daring is something I saw in her from the beginning. And physically, I'm a complete klutz, but I'm also a mother. And I always tip my kids to, mum has to do the martial arts, the fencing, this, even the kind of helping with swimming, bike riding. And in fact, it turned out that my kids, like my husband, are really outdoorsy people and way more physically adept and daring than I ever was as a kid. So I definitely took some of that and built her character around this kind of physical ease in her body and lack of kind of fear that she has. And part of that was discovering and learning more about a real South Indian martial art called Kalari, which is still practiced today. But there are many kind of legends and songs and about martial women who would learn this martial art, where they sometimes use weapons and sometimes it's kind of hand-to-hand combat fighting. So this idea of her kind of learning these martial arts from a very young age really fed into her character, that she's very physically at ease in her own body and is very kind of fearless because of that training.
Yeah. Oh, great. And so in my book, my main character, Hallie, she has all the elements of a hero, but she just doesn't realize it at the beginning of the book. She's spunky, she's resourceful, she's she's got a lot of great skills, but she sort of sees herself more as like the victim or the damsel in distress. She's, I guess, kind of an outsider because she has this love for horror films that nobody else seems to share with her. She has sort of grown apart from her two best friends. Her mother doesn't understand this love of horror films either. So when she sees herself, she has this goal of being an actress in a horror movie. But when she sees herself in the movie, she sees herself as playing the victim or the damsel in distress. And she's also kind of clumsy, Gita. Like she trips and falls a lot, and drops things, and so she's got this sort of like energy, but it's kind of a bumbling energy. But throughout the course of the book, through her actions and through her initiatives and through her resourcefulness, she finally does realize that she can not only be the hero, but she has to be the hero in order to, get through this situation.
I would also love to chat, also, I guess, on the topic of heroism, about Cosmic Cadets and Tethered to Other Stars, because I think that both of your books explore a concept of us versus them, like, insular groups, other groups. How do you treat them? How do you sort of get to know them? And navigating those feelings and what it sort of makes you think about. So I'd like to know from both of you, how did you develop and explore these topics specifically for the middle grade audience? Lisa, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So this is something that I have been thinking about for a long time. I'm Peruvian American, and so I grew up straddling two cultures, and then moving to the U.S. and more recently becoming involved in immigration activism here in Columbus. And in particular, when I started writing this book in 2017, I was seeing so much of that othering happening all around me, and in ways that had been present but often hidden for a long time, and it was now really coming to the forefront. And I had friends who would share stories of how they had been spoken to or treated. And so what I wanted to do with this book was to show some of that, but really explore the nuances of it and the subtleties, the subtle ways that we other people. It can be very easy to point a finger at like these really egregious moments of racism and say, look at this is wrong. This isn't who we are. Let's not. But what happens more often and is much harder to address are those minor things, those small moments, those microaggressions, those calling somebody by the wrong name repeatedly, or making comments about someone's culture or food. And those are the things that are now being discussed more and have come to the forefront more, perhaps, but especially for kids, it's so easy to see things like that and not know what to do about it because it's not obvious. And I wanted to show these things, these really big, heavy things, in ways that are both very extreme. I mean, there's some moments in here that are dealing with unjust laws. We're dealing with talks about deportation. We're dealing with immigration agents and arrests, and those are very extreme things. But we are also dealing with moments in school where kids make comments, or sometimes it's not even a comment. And how in the world do you stand up to something that's just a feeling? Like, what do you do with that? How do you navigate it? And it is very, very hard, even for adults. So I wanted to show it in a way that kids could see. And I think that idea of orbits and getting pulled in different directions and being a force that can make a difference really came out as I was writing and thinking about Wendy and this kid who's very thoughtful. She's not the type of kid to stand up and lead a revolution. She's not the one out there. She has a friend who would 100% do that. She's not that person. So for her, it's more just about making the choice to stand firm in small ways, or to step up in small ways that don't seem like a big deal, but actually are shifting everything around her. So her heroism is very, very different than some of she's not out there fighting. She's not learning martial arts or fighting a monster or whatever all of these other really fun stories are doing. It's much more subtle than that, but also very important.
So when my partner and I first started trying to figure out what the story of this book was going to be, we had two things which we knew absolutely had to be true, and everything came out of those two things. And the first is, as much as I love Star Trek, it is a franchise with a very strong colonialist bent to it. And we wanted to find a way to tell a story of exploration, a story of first contact, and a story where one group who necessarily has significant technological advances beyond the other are meeting in a way that's respectful and productive and positive. And the second thing we wanted to do was have empathy solve problems. And nothing in this book, nothing in any Cosmic Cadets book which we ever make, will use violence as a solution to a problem. Every problem will be solved through conversation and thought and empathy. I keep saying the word, but it's really important to the book. And I think it's really important to model that for young readers. And so the heroism of my characters is a quieter, more thoughtful, more contemplative heroism. And the struggle then and the joy of this book was finding a way to make that exciting and dramatic, and to be able to put that against something which has violence and fighting, and have it still be fun for the reader and still be adventurous.
By the way, if anyone from the audience has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I think that's a really interesting segue to the next question, which also has your book in it, about kind of world building, the creatures that you feature in your book. So for Peril at Price Manor and Cosmic Cadets, both of your books have some creatures that readers might not see on a daily basis. In their world, or in the world that I know of at the moment. And I'd love to know how you both created your speculative fiction elements from the inspiration to the page. So Ben, do you want to start, because you were kind of talking about the world and what you wanted to achieve?
Yeah, I can start. I have an advantage here in that I am working in graphic novels, which are a collaborative medium. And so I have a artist who I can tell them something wild and nonsensical, and I have absolutely no idea what it's going to look like. And then they go away and come back an hour later with pages of sketches of all sorts of different things. And so the design and the world building of this planet and the people and the wildlife that live there, I give massive, massive credit to my partner who illustrated the book, for guiding the design of that whole process. And then on a more narrative level, the narrative qualities of the alien creatures and the alien wildlife were all guided by what the story needed. And so as soon as we had this idea of that death spiral of fear, then the idea of these creatures who communicate through empathy came. I forget which of us had the idea first, but it came to us, and it was just immediately, obviously that's the right answer. And then there's another non-sentient alien that the kids wind up interacting with, which is a predator on this planet. And we knew we needed an environmental hazard for them to deal with as a roadblock on their way towards finding peace. And given that the book is about finding healthy ways to deal with fear, among other things, but that's a major theme running through it, we came up with this predator who hunts by projecting fear out, which in using that as a sort of radar to find these empathetic creatures that will then reflect it back. So our kids have to deal with this thing which is hunting them and making them more and more and more terrified all the time. And the only way that they can avoid it is to process the things which they are afraid of. And so the speculative fiction always followed the needs of the narrative and the story and the characters that we were trying to tell.
All right. So the creature in my book is a slimy, tentacled blob that kind of looks like this, that hugs your face, kind of like this. So when I was trying to come up with this creature, I wanted to have something that could incapacitate the adults, but without doing permanent harm to them. So I picked this slimy tentacled creature. I kind of went with the slime factor just to give that humorous edge to what could otherwise be sort of a scary situation. And I also sort of took elements of zombieism, if that's a thing, because once this creature attaches to you, the victim sort of becomes like a zombie. Sort of, they can't really communicate. They just sort of amble around, without any direction. So that's what my creature is. And I guess, I got inspiration from the Alien movies. So we've got this face-hugging tentacled creature, and definitely the zombie movies. But I wanted to create a creature that could be a little bit scary, but not too scary. It also had this sort of humorous element, because my book, I feel like is for those kids who maybe aren't quite ready for the really scary middle grade stories. It's sort of an entry point into the horror genre. So it's not too scary. It's more funny.
Yeah, I think the whole time while I was reading your book, I'm deeply someone who does not like horror films. So reading the book was like, yes, this is just okay for me. I don't need to like worry about reading this at nighttime. It's fine. um The next question that I have is about the destiny of Minu Moonshine and Tethered to Other Stars. I think you both have kind of alluded to it already, which are the themes of speaking out, resistance, when you kind of make a stand. So I'd love to know from both of you if you could talk about these themes in relation to your inspiration for the book. Geeta, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I guess again coming back to my own experience as a mom, so Mina's journey towards active resistance, I guess, and speaking up reflects her coming of age, because during the book she turns 13. And I have two sort of teenagers and young adults now. And although we never really sheltered our kids from what was going on in the world, I noticed so much between those ages, that upper middle grade kind of ages of 10 to 13, how their worlds really expanded, their horizons expanded. They became much more aware of what was going on in the world around them, and their perceptions, they begin to formulate their own kind of ideas and kind of moral compass. So I think observing that in my daughter, maybe particularly, definitely fed into the character of Minu. And I know I'm a really outspoken person, sometimes way too much. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I should have just like kept quiet. So I think Minu also reflects my own character in that way too.
Yeah, mine is, so my book is a very personal book. It comes from deep inside my heart. I mentioned that I've been involved in immigration activism. So for many years, I was a part of Edith Espinal's activist team. Edith Espinal is a friend of mine who lived in sanctuary in a church here in Columbus, Ohio. And she lived in sanctuary for 3 years fighting a deportation order. And I was there from the very beginning when she was first trying to figure out what to do and seeking sanctuary and not knowing what that would mean or what it would look like. And throughout, it was a very educational experience, a very painful experience watching her go through that. And I have many other friends who I've accompanied to immigration meetings with ICE agents, check-ins. I've had friends I've seen deported. I've had to, tell family members. It's just a lot that I have seen and experienced. And for me, I come from this. I actually come from documentary film, so having told many of these types of stories through documentary film, I began to realize that the most compelling stories are really ones that people cannot tell. They can't get on screen and talk about this. It's not safe for them. So vulnerable populations going through such difficult things are often unable to tell their stories. And often it's not something that they are ready to do emotionally. So I came to the book from that place, looking for a way to share stories, and not just to share stories, but to tell stories that, Ben keeps mentioning empathy. Tell stories that will create a space for people to empathize who might not know anything about this experience. So middle grade is fantastic because it brings things close. It takes things that are so far away and so hard to understand, and you might not have any experience with at all, and brings it right here where you can understand it, because it's dealing with these feelings and emotions that we've all been through as kids trying to understand the world. So as far as my own inspiration for this book, that's where it's coming from. It's coming from a lot of people who I love, a lot of their stories and what they've been through. So bringing that into this book, and giving some of these stories to Wendy and to her family was a challenge for sure. It was something that I put so much into this to make sure that I was doing a responsible job of it and telling it in such a way that would do what I wanted. But it was also just, it was a lot of fun to see this come to life, and to see these stories that I know kind of change shape and show up on the page. So it's been an experience. My agent said, he used the phrase, "You cracked your heart open for this book," and that just, I said, well, there you go. You've written the perfect description of what writing this was like. So yeah, I'm not sure if that really answers your question. I think I just sort of started going off into the inspiration part of it. What was the question? I don't remember. But
It was about your characters figuring out their relationship to speaking up and resistance.
yeah, so I guess that is it. It's trying to find trying to give voice to my character when she's seeing all of this happen and isn't sure what to do with it. Because I know many kids who felt the same way.
Yeah, and I think something as well that I was thinking about when I was reading everyone's books too about the middle grade age group is that you have so much ability also to like influence minds and to speak to them in a more direct fashion than, someone reading a book to them. I think another thing that I loved and that I also find very representative of middle grade is also like friendship things, and sometimes often your first friendship like drama, there's so much change I feel like that happens throughout the middle grade years that it's hard to not escape, or it's hard to escape any friendship hiccups, any friendship issues. And that's something I wanted to chat with you all about, which are that friendship is another common theme throughout your books, and as I said, kind of middle grade as a whole. So I'd love to know if you could talk to me or talk to everyone actually about the creation of your side characters and the lessons they learn throughout the book in relation to friendship. Ben, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So, I don't have side characters so much. It's much more of an ensemble book. I have the 4 human kids and the 1 alien kid who are the core group who go through all of this together, and not one of them is given sort of primary place as the main character, which that was by design. That was a very intentional choice because we wanted anyone reading the book to be able to see themselves in the main character, and then whoever you identify with most becomes the main character for your reading of the story. And each of them has moments where they get to be the hero and they get to do the big thing. And each of them has moments where they fail and they stumble. And it falls to the rest of the group to help them stand up and help them learn what they did wrong and do better next time and solve the problem together as a group. So for me, for this book, the friendship stuff came naturally as a lovely and welcome, but not necessarily intentionally planned side effect of the way that we structured the lack of a main character. Is by necessity, in telling stories about people helping each other, you're telling stories about friendship. That's what friendship is it's helping the people you care about.
Yeah, in my book, there's really two, I guess, divisions of groups of side characters. There's Wendy's family, which I put a lot of time into developing all of their backstories. It's very layered and complex, and then there is also, and this was a lot of fun to write. Wendy is starting a new school at the beginning of the book, so you get to meet everybody as she meets them, and she's developing new friendships and figuring out who's really a friend, and there's a crush, and there's a lot of side characters there. And there is one friend in particular who stands out. She was a lot of fun to write. She is a firecracker. She's a little like social justice warrior kid who just wants to take on the entire world. She is also the character who anyone who knows me and reads my book is like, oh, I see you. I'm like, yeah, hi. And she has to learn some things because she really, she likes to throw herself into the action and make a difference no matter what happens along the way, no matter who she might have to shove aside. So she has to really come around. There's one of my favorite scenes in the book is actually a confrontation between Etta and Wendy. And it's for me, it's actually, if I ever have to like read a scene aloud, that's the one I like to go to because it feels so critical for speaking to activism and what it means to be an ally and what it means to be an advocate for other people. And, her heart is in the right place, but she's going to screw up. And for Wendy to call her out on it, that's a big step for Wendy. And for Etta to respond to it well is a big part of her journey. So, side characters, I love side characters. I love friendships that include moments like that of confrontation that really explore some of the deeper layers of what it means to be a good friend. So that one was a lot of fun to write. And she'll be back. We'll see more of her in future books.
Yeah, friendships are such a key part of life, as you said, Lily, for young readers, and I love that books reflect that. So I guess Minu started off the story. She's an orphan. She's quite isolated. She's kind of fiercely independent as a character, maybe even slightly prickly. But during the course of her journey and her quest, she gathers this, I guess, kind of found family of friends around her. And I loved that journey that she makes. So the emotional journey that she makes, as well as the physical journey, and actually learning to trust people and let people in to her kind of, to her heart, I guess. And I think that was really important for me as well, because, stories of change or revolution that don't kind of center collective actions and the kind of, gathering of hearts and minds, to me, just don't feel realistic. So it was important to me that because it was a story of kind of change and revolution, that she had friends from kind of all different parts of society, and that she learned that, in order to make change happen, you have to open yourself up to all kinds of things and to learn to trust your friends.
I also think that friendship is a big part of middle grade books. For the readers, it's a time of life when friendship is one of the most important things that they're, experiencing. And there are good parts of friendships and there are bad parts of friendships. So for my three characters, there's Hallie, who has recently sort of drifted away from her two best friends. And, this is something that happens to kids this age a lot. And then for my other two characters, these twins who have been secluded in their home for most of their life, all of their life almost, they don't have any friends. They just have each other. So they've actually never experienced, what it's like to have friends. So when Hallie comes along, the three of them just, they kind of bond naturally, needing each other, especially in this tricky situation that they're in. But they do form this bond, and they each have definite strengths that are needed for solving the problem that they're having with this creature. So they have to work together. And I think, just basically for the readers of this age, relationships with friends is, an important thing to learn about through books. And so you have to learn about the good parts of friendships and the not so good parts of friendships that readers are experiencing all the time.
I want to bring it back a little bit to asking about what some of your favorite middle grade stories were while growing up. And also a very selfish question, which is for me to ask you, what are some of your middle grade TBR things that you're about to read or that you would love to recommend? Elisa, do you want to start?
Sure. I as a kid, I read a lot of classics. I grew up in Peru, and we had a pretty limited library, but we had my mom had like all of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books and Anne of Green Gables and series like that I plowed through. I finished all of my books, and then I started reading my mom's books. So like I didn't have access to a ton of books. I remember the first time I went to a library, I was 7 or 8, and I was just completely blown away. We were visiting the US, and we went to a library in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I just could not get over the fact that these were all available for free to read. And I still I work at the library. I still feel that way almost every time I go in, just like, how is this real? But yeah, I have lately been reading every Jerry Spinelli book I can get my hands on. He's kind of been I've been really focused on him because I've just started writing my third book, and it's a male main character, and it deals with some ideas about masculinity and what that means. And Jerry Spinelli has done some brilliant things with that. Ringer is one of my favorite books by him. Maniac Magee as well. I also love Kate DiCamillo. Been reading all of hers lately too. It's just been like Jerry Spinelli and Kate DiCamillo in my brain. But there are so many fantastic books coming out constantly in middle grade. It's just like I said, I work at the library, so I feel like I'm constantly pulling things off the shelf. Like, oh, I want to read this. Oh, I want to read this. Erin Entrada Kelly always has fabulous stuff coming out. Donna Barbara Higuera's book, if you haven't read The Last Cuentista, was fantastic. There's just tons. Aida Salazar has fabulous books. I could recommend books all day, and I actually do at work, so I should probably stop, or I will just talk forever.
I can go next. When I was growing up, I really loved whimsical and fantastical books like by Roald Dahl. And in addition, I love books that, we're talking about normal adolescent topics that might not get talked about in real life, like with parents and teachers. But so like Judy Blume's books that dealt with issues of adolescence that people weren't always talking about. So you could read about them and relate to them. So those are books I really enjoyed growing up. And as for books I'm reading now, since I'm sort of in the horror genre and the sort of spooky genre, I'm reading the series by Kirsten White. It's a Sinister Summer series. It's very dark humor and sort of, got that Tim Burton-ish quality. as well as the series by Laura Senf, which is the first book was The Clackety. It's very spooky, but also just really imaginative. There's a second book that I haven't read yet, but I'm looking forward to reading.
Can I just say real quick, because Laura, you brought this up, the Judy Blume books. I just got this arc, and if you don't know about Free Period by Ali Therese, this is exactly what you were talking about some girls who decide that period equity is something they're going to fight for at school. A couple of troublemakers who love to play pranks take on an actual thing that they care about. And it sounds, I haven't read it yet, but that's definitely on my TBR, Free Period.
Great. Yeah, I mean, some of mine are quite old, because although we did have a public library, the books would just like stay there for decades. So really classic authors like Diana Wynne Jones, who wrote Howl's Moving Castle, and Joan Aiken, who wrote the Wills of Willoughby Chase series. And there are so many amazing fantasy writers for kind of middle grade and YA today. It's really hard to pick any out, but I love Franny Billingsley for the quality of her writing. She wrote Chime and The Robber Girl recently, and Kate Milford, who wrote The Green Glass House and sequels. Just amazing world building. And I really love Christina Suntunovat's books, which I think won a Newbery or a Newbery Honor. I think it's A Wish in the Dark and the Last Map Maker, I think the last one was called. And I'm like, every time, like, I kind of scan sort of, I'm just the internet, I'm just looking for her next book, because I'm like, please, I really want to read the next one. I'm such a big fan of her work.
When I was growing up, I read very little middle grade stuff. What I read didn't particularly appeal to me, and I was, to put it generously, let's say precocious, because that makes it sound better than arrogant. But I wanted to read the things for adults, and I wanted to read science fiction, and there was not a lot of good middle grade science fiction when I was a kid, or if there was, then the libraries in North Carolina were not good at finding it. So when I was in 5th grade, I was reading Asimov. I read Heinlein in 6th grade. I read Zelazny in 8th. I was reading things that were way beyond what I should have been, and I didn't understand them at all. And it's only recently that I have come back to middle grade things. And I come from a film and TV background, and so most of the middle grade things which I have consumed have been TV shows or movies. But I loved Korra and Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the Clone Wars TV show did incredible work at making those characters make sense. And the She-Ra TV show was just one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. For books, it's mostly comics that I read middle grade stuff. Richard Fairgray's Black Sand Beach series is a really, really great kids horror series in the sort of older middle grade range. Norman Sherliff's Skullcat is a great younger middle grade horror series. What have I read recent? Kintz is a really, it might be a little older than middle grade. It's right on that cusp. It's about a girl who at her quinceanera discovers that the women in her family get superpowers when they turn 15, and then the superpowers last for 1 year and then they go away. So it's a coming of age story about this girl learning how to use her superpowers that she's going to have for 1 year. It's a really, really beautiful book.
Yeah, I'm also like personally in love with the Columbus Library. It is so beautiful. I could not stop staring. So yeah, I mean, when I wrote this question, I was also thinking that it was also difficult to find middle grade books, at least for me growing up. Whether that was an issue of representation, but also an issue of, I think, like being pushed then to read above your age group. So I feel like I've only also been, as an adult, kind of sinking back in middle grade and reading books that I would be just like so happy to time travel backwards and just like give to myself. Um, I wanted to end with an interesting question I've been seeing. I don't know if you've all seen the trend on like social media where like people write down like a list of all of the books that they wrote and then the book that they sold, because I think some of you maybe mentioned it, that you don't only write in middle grade and that there are other genres, other books, other projects that you've written. So I would love if you could all share kind of where this book that we're talking about today kind of lands on that list for you in terms of the number of books that you read, sorry, not read, sorry, the number of books you wrote or, queried or whatever. Did you want to start?
Yeah, so I don't want to shock anyone too much who's watching, but this is actually my fourth full manuscript. So the first two are YA, then there was one middle grade, which was kind of sci-fi-ish as well. And then this is the second middle grade and the fourth full manuscript that I actually sold. And kind of in between that, I actually have published poetry books as well, but those are for adults. So yeah, it's been a long ride, definitely.
I can go next. So Cosmic Cadets was the first book I ever wrote, but as I said, I come from a film and TV background. I spent almost 15 years working as a film executive before I started writing for publishing. And in that time, I wrote dozens of screenplays that never went anywhere. And one that got made, which I recommend to nobody, but I keep it on the poster behind me over there as a reminder of just how badly things can go. So Cosmic Cadets was the first full-length book that I ever wrote, but it is far from the first thing that I wrote.
Yeah, that's interesting because that actually makes me think, I've done documentary film for years. I never thought of those as writing. I mean, there's storytelling. I'll say there's storytelling, but yeah, I guess I have produced stories in other ways frequently. But this is Tethered to Other Stars is the first book that I wrote, that I completed. I was writing another book before this, adult fantasy, epic multi-POV, ginormous thing that I am still working on and I love and I do want to finish, and it's going to be fantastic. I realized I don't know, I'm not ready to do this. Like, I am trying to do something way too big. So I took the age-old advice of write what you know, and I said, if I'm actually gonna get something publishable, I need to bring it in. And so I wrote a middle grade book set in the town where I live during the time I was writing, and managed to complete it. So that was my first one. And I do have another one coming next year that is also complete. And then I've started work on the third, and I still have my epic multi-POV adult fantasy waiting for me to come back to it. And I think about it often.
Yeah, so Peril at Price Manor is my first book as well. The first book I ever wrote and finished. I have another book that is kind of not quite finished, and it's set aside for now. And then I have a draft of another book that's with my publisher. But yeah, Peril at Price Manor, I really devoted years and years and years to. It's a story that I believed in and just wanted to keep trying. Getting published takes a long time, and this is just the book that I really believed in and wanted to keep working through until it saw that final end point of publication.
And the final question that I have for you all, which is one that I just selfishly ask almost every panel because I just want to know how you all refill your creative well. I feel like the frequency at which I ask just is obviously very telling that I don't know how to refill my creative well. So please help me, all of you. Laura, do you want to start?
Sure. Just by reading, basically. That's how I do it. When I was writing my first draft of Peril at Price Manor, I would spend like an hour or so reading before I even opened my laptop. I think just reading the same sort of genre that you're intending to write in just kind of gets the gears moving in your brain and gets your imagination running. So that's how I do it. I read a lot. I read, before I write. I read at bedtime. I read, while waiting in a waiting room.
Yeah, I can go next. So, yeah, I mean, I do read a lot, and I definitely love to read in between projects. So when I take a kind of complete break between drafts, that's when I do a lot of the reading in the same genre. But when I'm writing and I'm actively in the middle of a draft, I don't like to read in the same genre. But what I love to do is to just kind of get away from my desk somehow and, take a walk. I live in London. I'm very lucky. There are so many amazing museums, art galleries, things to see and do. And I always just, find that just walking around and looking at some paintings or some sculpture or watching a movie sometimes could just snap me out of that place where I'm very exhausted, and which is the place I'm in now. So I sympathize completely, Lou. But I'm just being kind to myself, and letting myself take the break. And then when I need to, then the well it'll refill on its own with that.
So I realized I should have mentioned this when talking about other books that we've written. As I said earlier, middle grade is not my only genre. I also write very different hard crime thrillers. And this year, I am a double debut. I had Cosmic Cadets come out, but also my first crime thriller, which is A Man of Lies, on the wall behind me over there. And that's a traditional prose novel. That's not a graphic novel. But working in two such wildly different genres, what I've found is if I'm feeling burnt out on the crime stuff, which usually happens about when I reach the end of a manuscript, I can put that aside and go live in the lovely, supportive middle grade world of happiness and friendship and beauty. And then so I'll write that. And then when I'm feeling burnt out on that, I can go back to the horrible, awful, miserable world of crime and murder and violence and live in that horrible place for a while. And having those two to bounce between keeps me from ever burning out too badly on one of them.
Ben, you're really selling us on that thriller book of yours. It's horrible, awful.
It is also a story about empathy and hope and love, but there is violence, there is murder. But it's a queer crime thriller about a gay man learning how important it is to be seen and trying to become the person who he knows he can be. But also there's violence and sadness.
Well, I would say something similar, actually. Switching genres does help. Like I mentioned, I have this fantasy and I really love delving into that world. That's just a really fun place for my brain to go. So I do like going there. Also, just switching to a different kind of creative thing helps. So I really enjoy visual arts in general. And if I get caught up drawing or painting or doing something like that, sometimes that's what my brain needs because it's a very different type of creativity and it allows my mind to just kind of process without even realizing that I'm processing. And sometimes I'll, have a breakthrough thought about my book while I'm doing something else that's not writing. So that can help. But yeah, I definitely read all the time. I constantly am streaming either audiobooks or podcasts about and by writers. So yeah, I have a lot of different things that I like to go to when I'm not writing.
Well, thank you everyone for sharing. It sounds like how I refill my creative well is to become a writer, funnily enough. But thank you all so much for sharing. I've left the links in the description box below. So please go check out the books, request them at your library, add them to your bookshelf, pick them up as well, do all the amazing things. And I would love to thank everyone who's watching. I would love to thank my lovely panelists. And I will hope you all have a really great rest of your day. Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Lily.
It was such a pleasure.